So, welcome again to tonight's Third Thursday program from Mass Bay RRE. We're pleased to welcome Ross Capon, the longtime former president and CEO of the National Association of Railroad Passengers. He's here tonight with the story of his life in and love of railroads, program titled A Life in Railroading, Tower 15 to Beacon Hill to Capitol Hill. Ross fell in love with railroading while hanging out at the New York Central's Boston and Albany, Tower 15 at the west end of Newton, just east of, just east of an impressive bridge over the Charles River. Riverside, the railroad location, was an impressive junction before the Highland Branch was converted to what is now the MBTA's Green Line. It hosted Boston, Riverside, Framingham, Worcester commuter trains of various types on both the main line and the Highland Branch, intercity passenger trains, and local and long distance freights. Working from 1971 to 1975 for Guy Rosmarin, special assistant to Massachusetts Governor Francis W. Sargent, and later for Secretary of Transportation and Construction Alan Altschuler, Ross helped save the region's now thriving commuter rail system when powerful interests sought to kill it. In Washington, his work from 1975 to 2014 for what is now the Rail Passengers Association, of which he is now president emeritus, helped Amtrak in general and its national network in particular survive life-threatening budget threats. For the last decade, and particularly since 2018, Ross has worked to show Amtrak that Capitol Hill values the continued operation of private cars and to help show Congress the value of Amtrak's national network. So, Ross, without further ado, welcome to Mass Bay RRE.
Okay. I wanted to thank Dave for the introduction and for helping actually prepare some of the slides you will see, the ones with maps. I wanted to thank Philip Capon, my second son, who did a lot of the scanning of slides in earlier years that many of which I'm using tonight, and Tom Capon for setting up my background here and for what he just did in getting me technically here. So the least important thing about this picture is the 8-year-old me that you're looking at, but this is in Windermere in the Lake District northeast of Liverpool. It's a terminal station on a short line which survived the beaching cuts and I believe still has service. And that locomotive is Aden, A-D-E-N. You probably know that from the geography game. And it's a Class 460, introduced in 1934. My first cab ride was on the main central at Freiburg, switching in the yard there. This is on the Mountain Division, or what used to be the Mountain Division. Some people say the Mountain Division never should have been built. Probably a lot of rail lines in this country that economists could say that about. Why Freiburg? Well, my parents were Swedenborgians, and I grew up as a Swedenborgian and recently returned to the church. And the Freiburg New Church Assembly is located on US 302, just short of the New Hampshire line and just across the street from the Mountain Division. So I remember fondly the night trains in both directions whistling through the night, and lots of grade crossings, of course. So you could tell when the train was getting closer. And there was a very fast, it looked to me, very fast day train, Portland, St. Johnsbury. And here it is at the grade crossing that was right across from the church camp. So you really knew when the train was there. And it was on looked like sand roadbed, not anything like I had seen on the New York Central. I was privileged to get to England twice as a child, 1960, while I was 13. Here is the Golden Arrow, the London-Paris train arriving Dover Marine, and there's the locomotive on the turntable afterwards. This is not North Station or South Station or Back Bay. but it's Boston in the UK in 1960. And this train is heading from Aberystwyth, probably towards Crewe to the east. And it was taken from the narrow gauge Vale of Rydal train that goes between Aberystwyth and Devil's Bridge, and was at the time British Railways, I believe, only narrow gauge train. So now we get down to brass tacks, and thanks to Dave for creating this map that shows where I spent a lot of time. The line here to Riverside Yard is actually still exists, somewhat surprisingly.
And
And
we've ridden over it.
Here's an aerial view of the same general location, and a even further distant aerial view. And you can see here the huge Riverside Yard that MBTA has constructed for many years after the MTA started running the Green Line on the Highland Branch. All of that was parking, maybe more parking than they needed, excuse me, but it was free parking. Today it's $2 a weekend day and $6 a weekday day, but a tremendous facility for light rail training and everything. And here's another diagram that shows Riverside Center, which is roughly where the Jordan Marsh warehouse used to be, and which had freight service. The Lower Falls branch is on the left of the Riverside Yard of MBTA, and there are plans to revive it, although I'm guessing, I don't know whether it will follow the margin of the yard or will it go down to the trail that's along the river. Now, this was just taken last month, but this particular view, except for the color of the train and the logo, you could have taken 100 years ago. I should also say, except for in the foreground, you'll see the railing for a brand new Pony Truss Bridge that forms part of the trail, and which replaced an old bridge that was in need of repair or replacement. And here I just recently discovered from the collection of Matthew Cosgrove, who gave me permission to show this. This is the bridge that predates the Stone Arch Bridge that I had assumed existed forever. Probably this was built in the 1900s or the 1910s. And so that means the Stone Arch Bridge is over 100 years old. What's interesting about this picture, by the way, this picture is looking upstream, not to be confused with the cover slide, which was looking downstream, or actually the picture I just took. This is looking downstream towards Waltham. This is looking upstream towards Needham, as you can tell by the fact that the signal tower and the station are to the left. Looks like the station, the signal tower, got a different roof. But what is interesting about this is the number of canoe rental places. Canoeing was a great sport. The only such place I remember, which burned down probably in the 70s, was on the right side of the river beyond the bridge. That is, on the western side of the river. Here is a quintessential picture of Riverside Station, complete with my bicycle. You can tell anyway, this picture was, there's a few pictures here. I recently discovered negatives from some Kodak Cub camera that I used in the late 1950s. And you can see the mast of the freestanding mast off to the right for the Highland Branch. And this is actually one of my favorite pictures. This is the westbound Framingham local RDC car and a local train coming off the Highland Branch heading back into Boston. And in the midday, they had a couple of trains that did revenue trips in both parts of the circuit. That is, they could come out on the main line as a local to Riverside and then go back on the Highland Branch to Boston, or vice versa. And here we are on my 11th birthday, May 31st, 1958. This is the last diesel train coming off the Highland Branch. And it was a big deal, lots of people there. This is a terrible picture. I'll have to throw my late mother under the bus because she took it because I was on that train getting a free ride probably back to Newtonville. But you can see at the left, the guy with the flash, he was a reporter for the Boston Herald, and a probably a much better, sharper picture of almost the same view was published in the Boston Herald. One of my favorite views at Riverside, this was a mid-afternoon local disappearing into the wilderness. From my point of view, the wilderness was Wellesley by way of Weston. And here comes a Bud car from Springfield, and this prompts the discussion about the big differences between what's there today and what was there when I was a kid. What is there today is a vastly improved commuter rail service between Boston and Worcester, actually much better than existed in the 1950s. What is gone, with the exception of the Lakeshore Limited, is the intercity service. There were several trains a day between Boston and Springfield on 2-hour schedules, and this is one of them. This is eastbound on track 2. They did 2 hours stopping in what's now Back Bay, Newtonville, Framingham, Worcester, and Palmer. And of course, today we get a lot of talk about high-speed rail, which I don't expect to live to see on the Boston and Albany, but it would be nice to see an effort made to put back reliable 2-hour running time service between Boston and Springfield, which could benefit CSX because if you restored some double track, there's track capacity there 24/7. The passenger trains are not there 24/7. What you also do not have anymore is long distance freight. Actually, I don't think there's any freight at all on this line now. But for business reasons, as you know, CSX basically terminates their freight trains in Worcester. There is some service as far east as Framingham. But here, this was in the old days of Beacon Park Yard in Alston, a big westbound train with 5 matching PA and PB units and some reefer cars at the front of the following train. So that provided some variety in train watching. This is back to my old camera. Here's the New England States train 27 on track 1 at Riverside. And here it is on track 1 at the Woodland Street Bridge, which I could say was halfway between Auburndale and Riverside, except that because the turnpike is where tracks 3 and 4 used to be in half the neighborhood, the platform for Auburndale Station now runs all the way between the bridge on which the successor to the bridge on which I was standing for this picture, and Auburn Street, probably close to a mile east. Henry Hobson Richardson, the famous architect for Trinity Church and lots of railroad stations and other great buildings, designed a lot of train stations for the Boston and Albany and a few other railroads. And this was the first. This is Auburndale built in 1881. And Auburndale and Riverside were the 2 stations that I was closest to. Now, the first thing that happened in 1959 was kind of a dark fall for me. because my dad died suddenly on September 3rd. I entered junior high school a few days later. And then at the end of October, the New York Central announced, well, they withdrew a fairly massive fleet of commuter trains, replacing them with just 3 peak hour weekday trains in each direction. And initially, I think they ran almost as many cars on those 3 trains as they had on the entire fleet. So here, it might have been 13 cars, double headed by 2 of those then ubiquitous RS units. Newtonville was another Richardson station, and it shows the fact that the station, I believe, was built before the railroad was depressed. So the station is up on street level. The railroad is in a ditch behind it. And Newtonville was a station served by all of the long distance trains. The only passenger trains that didn't stop in Newtonville were a couple of commuter trains that ran nonstop between Riverside and Back Bay. And here you have the Newtonville train shelter for the express trains, the track 1 and 2 passengers. And so there were the stages of destruction for commuter rail on the B&A was in 1958, the diesel trains of the Highland Branch went away, although 13 months later they were replaced by what is now the Green Line trolley cars. And Trains Magazine at the time wrote about how the basic virtue of steel wheel on steel rail was preserved. And of course, for the Highland Branch, much more frequent service. And then initially they kept Boston Riverside trains, and the trains would go on to the Highland Branch and go into the railroad Riverside yard. The locomotives would run around the train because there was no push-pull back then. And so the next stage after that was they were allowed to get rid of all the stations between Newton Corner and University. So University, Alston, Brighton, Faneuil, and Railroad Newton, but locally known as Newton Corner, lost service. And the rest of the service was replaced with skip-stop trains, which was a pretty elegant solution for the surviving communities. But then, as I said, at the end of October '59, all that disappeared and was replaced with 3 rush hour trains that initially started out very long. The other thing that happened about the same time was that the secondary long distance trains that New York Central ran were replaced with Bud cars. So this was the last day. This is October 24th, 1959. The Iroquois, which was the Boston section of a significant New York Central train. This was their last trip. You can see very faintly Pullman car numbers. There was only one Pullman car, I think, at the end, and Chicago coaches. And so the Bud cars provided one advantage. They were faster. So I believe they had a 4-hour and 15-minute run time between Boston and Albany. And that's Albany, the west side of the river, the old railroad location, with stops at Pittsfield and Chatham, in addition to the locations I mentioned earlier for the Springfield trains. The Boston Albany trains, so the Iroquois that left at 7:30 or ish, the Bud car that replaced it left at 9:00 p.m. And there was another train that had a similar speed up. Now this is in Auburndale. This is one of those 3 surviving trains. You can see here track 4 is still used. There was local freight. I guess it was mainly Mayflower Furniture in West Newton. So they maintained track 4 for a while, but the passenger trains were on track 2, which used to be an express track. And here is roughly the same location as it appears today. you can see that very long platform. By the way, when I was working for Guy Rosmarin, the gentleman who was then the MBTA's general counsel told me he had persuaded the Turnpike Authority to put in platforms for Auburndale, West Newton, and Newtonville. Very long platforms is the disadvantage. The advantage, though, is it gave you direct access to the two bridges. A little bit of Boston and Albany history. There were two stations. Boston and Albany did not use Back Bay back then. There was Trinity Place, which is what's left of it towards the end is here with my mom's Falcon. And that was for the westbound trains. That was where people hung out. And here's another view of it. You can see the beginning of the turnpike-related destruction a little bit to the east. It looks like that signal mast is in the middle of where track 1 used to be. But anyway, that Huntington Avenue was the name of the eastbound station. Nobody hung out there because they just got off the train and, in my father's case, walked to Northeastern University. The walk from Huntington Station was much closer. Now we're back to Riverside. You can see here that the train is gone. The second track, it's entering the Highland Branch. The second track is gone, and the train is still in business, I guess, for Grossman's Lumber. Here it is. I believe the bridge it's on there is was 128, and today would be the northbound exit ramp for people who want to get off 128 and get onto Recreation Road, which is where you could go off to Weston, or you could park and go down to the Pony Trust Bridge. To the right in the original photo, which doesn't show here, there was a huge parking lot, which was the MBTA's initial, or the MTA's initial Riverside parking lot. I was going to say this wonderful train setup at Riverside was not very efficient because all the tracks were signaled for one direction only. So you needed 2 express tracks and 2 local tracks. This picture was taken just a little bit west of Riverside, and it gives you a hint of the one track in the area that was signaled in both directions. And that was in Wellesley and Natick. They had eliminated track 3. And you can see at the right, just to the right of the locomotives here, a switch where track 3 ends as you go west and the trains go into track 4. So the local train operation was essentially single track from this point over almost Framingham. Now, this train itself was a relatively unusual train. It was a mail and express train that was in the employee timetable, but never in the public timetable. I think it did on weekends. It may have carried passengers from Albany to Pittsfield as sort of they had a 1 train a day commuter operation out there. But it also gives you a sense of all the mail and express that probably is not on the rails anymore. So here we come to a series of slides that kind of made me really hate the highway lobby, if you will. This is the cover slide, the Riverside building in 1961. And here the trains are still using tracks 3 and 4 west. And that is those 3 local trains, because Wellesley and Natick were not yet equipped to handle passengers on the express tracks. So they maintained the interlocking at Tower 15. The trains would come out and stop at Newtonville, West Newton, Auburndale on tracks 1 and 2, and then they would cross over to tracks 3 and 4 so they could handle Riverside and the Wellesley and Natick stations. And this is the time when I became friends with Mr. Cameron, who was the signal tower operator, and I was allowed to pull some of the switches. But this didn't last for long. That was 1961. Here's 1962. The building's all boarded up. Track 4 is still there. Track 3 is gone. And then we get, and that's the Riverside Station in 1962. And then complete destruction. The buildings are gone. Track 4 is gone. This is 1963. Now, one thing we never saw in the B&A before 1960 was bud cars running multiple. Completely different world from the Boston and Maine, where North Station was all bud cars except for the little Talgo set, and from the New Haven, which had some big New Haven RDC trains. But after they eliminated most of the commuter trains, they converted one of the few Boston Springfield trains that had been running with locomotives and coaches to a two-car bud car train. I believe that the guy that's on track 4 there is running away from the train. I don't think the train stopped there, but you can see in the background that while track 4 is still connected to the main line, and there's a switch showing the Lower Falls branch connecting to it, there is already the foundation of the bridge that will carry the turnpike over the tracks and to the north side, where it will connect with the original turnpike. This picture here was showing that in 1968, Riverside, without any buildings, still had they had put that blacktop down and still handled passengers. And that double header train with 13 cars, well, it towards several years later, this one in 1968, probably the third train of the evening, the lightest used, was down to 2 cars, the clerestory roof cars. You've already seen that picture, so we'll skip that. So here's roughly the same view. That's Riverside. This is the Lakeshore Limited last month. And you can see, of course, the completed Turnpike Bridge over in the background, and a little bit closer. Now we have a series of looks at the Highland Branch. This picture was taken the day before the last Highland Branch diesel commuter train. So this was May 30th, 1958. The next train we have is the Lower Falls local freight. This was in 1962. And then this is almost the same view last month. There is a track still there. I believe it connects to the MBTA. It has overhead catenary. It was used to test the newest MBTA Green Line cars. And here is what is known as Riverside Switch. The catenary, as you can see, ends with where the fence is, but the track continues on. I don't know if they ever opened the fence. And there's a little short siding used for work equipment where track 4 used to be. And of course, the Turnpike Bridge over. Now, what was very interesting to me is to discover that Riverside still exists in trail world. This is posted on the Newton side of that footbridge that I took an earlier picture from. And the interesting thing that it says is you see the map of the trail, and it says that they plan to extend the trail from the truss bridge up to the Riverside Depot location and rehabilitate and reopen the pedestrian tunnel that that passengers used to use to get to the trains at Riverside. and which canoers used to use to get from Auburndale over to the other side of the river. And so there's a bit of work to be done here. This is the way the depot side of the pedestrian tunnel looks today. And this is the way the Riverside, the Auburndale side, the dead end of Charles Street looks. And so a lot of work to be done, but it will be really nice for that to be rehabilitated. And it even raises the question of whether Riverside would become a railroad stop again. In my dreams, the MBTA would run shuttles from their station over to this station so people could make connections. Anyway, we're back to Woodland Street Bridge in Auburndale. This is the 415 train that later became a two-car Bud car train. And here is I guess you call it the funeral train. It was a big deal for a kid for a train with a streamlined engine to be stopped in Auburndale. But it was stopped in Auburndale for the purpose of tearing up track 3. And so here you can see the cars filled with rails that used to be track 3. And then you can look towards the Woodland Road Bridge that I took that earlier picture from. That's the bridge that was there before the turnpike was built. And then in 2011, roughly the same view. There's a turnpike to our left. There's a wider new Woodland Road bridge over. There's a stairwell, and there's an 11-year-old Capon who got off the train along with me. And if you turn around and you stand up on the bridge, as I did last month, there is the commuter train at the mile-long Auburndale platform, or half a mile. I was standing near or on the Woodland Street Bridge, and if you follow the rail line around, you can see a bridge in the distance. You can also see a stairway from that bridge. That's Auburn Street. So I guess the advantage of having such a long platform is you have direct access to Woodland Road or Auburn Street, except the access wasn't real good the day I was there because a derelict bicycle was lying on the landing of one of that distant bridge. So people would be hard pressed to get down to the train from it. Okay, we'll leave Riverside for a bit. This is the one train a day Dedham local that the New Haven ran. This is at Reedville. The shelter behind it, I believe, was what was used for the Franklin trains. So there was a 3-way split coming off the main line, the main line itself to Providence, the Franklin branch, and the Dedham branch. And this train was taken in 1964. I don't think it lasted much longer. Now, railroad enthusiast meetings, that was the first place I really discovered there was a lot of people that had, like me, an unreasonable interest in trains. And so one of the first trips that I took was on the Hoosac Tunnel in Wilmington. We went out to Hoosac Tunnel. We went through the tunnel, and then we came back to this station, and then to transfer to the Hoosac Tunnel and Wilmington, which no longer exists. I think it served a nuclear power plant. HT&W. It was called the Hoot, Toot, and Whistle, I think, colloquially. This was October 4th,
right.
October 4th, 1964. And we went up to this yard. Is this Wilmington? I'm not sure. Anyway, that's where we got to. And another view of the yard, complete with people's clothing hanging up to dry. So it was a nice October day. The weather gods smiled on RRE. Now, in this day and age, unlike today, North Station was home to just Bud cars, and the funny little train, was it a Talgo that went to Reading? Anyway, on February 20th, 1965, the Canadian National sent a big special from Montreal, I guess filled with Canadians to see the wonders of Boston. It was a big train. Then, just a week later, on February 27th, there was the train that didn't make it to North Conway. The railroad enthusiasts special wound up terminating at Mount Whittier on the North Conway branch because a Jordan spreader, whose job is to clear the tracks of snow and ice, not derail, derailed. And we couldn't proceed any further. It was a fairly big train. We spent a long time there. One thing I remember about that trip is when we got back to North Station, the conductor said to some other folks getting off the train, "I hope you had a good time." And they didn't give him an answer. So I piped up with, "Yeah, I had a good time." So I hope the conductor felt a little better. In August, in 1967 was the last run of the Concord, New Hampshire train regular service on the B&M. And this is taken at Nashua. It'd be interesting to figure out, is the conductor shaking hands with the mayor of Nashua? Does the present mayor of Nashua want a train or not? And somebody's kid there, maybe that's the mayor's son, or the head of the committee to save trains. And here is a train at Manchester. Now, there was an interesting moment at a railroad enthusiast meeting. There was a speaker that came to talk about the creation of the MBTA and the 79 cities and towns. And I said something impolitic like, "So do you mean this is the end of train service for communities outside the 79? And there was a gentleman there, probably did the right thing. He said, well, he didn't answer. He said, "We'll let him off the hook on that question." This, I think, was before they cooked up the one train a day from Newburyport that would run closed door from basically Newburyport to North Station, and the same thing, Haverhill, Andover, Lawrence had one train a day before the Commonwealth got religion and really opened up frequent service to Newburyport and Fitchburg and Haverhill, but unfortunately not into New Hampshire, other than for the Downeaster, which is another story and not a Massachusetts story. Towards the end, the Grand Trunk, the aforementioned Grand Trunk, ran a Saturday-only train between Montreal and Portland, I think basically to bring Canadians down to get to the beaches of Maine, Old Orchard Beach and stuff. Here is a nice shot of the buses that met the train to take those people to Old Orchard Beach and wherever. And I actually drove up to Danville Junction from my hangout on Westport Island and rode the train from Danville Junction down to Portland and back. Danville Junction was where the Mountain Division crossed the Grand Trunk. And I should say, on the subject of the Grand Trunk making the Mountain Division kind of superfluous, 1857, the year when the Portland and Ogdensburg was chartered, and which eventually became the Grand Trunk, the main Central Mountain Division, that was the year the Grand Trunk became the world's largest railroad system. Moving on to another railroad special, this is August 19th, 1967. Looking north at the Falmouth station, you can see the nice map of Cape Cod that was adorned the front of the train. And this is looking south at Falmouth. We actually made it to South Dennis on this trip. And here is the train coming off the east side of the Buzzards Bay Bridge over the Cape Cod Canal. In 1968, I spent a summer in North Africa. At the time, I thought my job was to become someone who would help developing nations and help make sure that the United States would never be tempted to do another Vietnam. It probably will not surprise you to learn that what I came away from the summer of 1968 was some knowledge about the railways of Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. This is one of the older MU trains in diesel MUs at the station in Tunis. They ran narrow gauge south from Tunis and standard gauge west for interchange with Algeria west from Tunis. In Morocco, I was on a mixed train. By the way, I should say that this is a long train, a mixed freight and passenger. This is somewhere between Oujda, the border city, and Taourirt. It's spelled Taourirt. And I'm not Moroccan, and I don't know, and I'm not French, and I'm not sure how you would pronounce that. But anyway, we'll call it T-Town. And one of the things that I came back with was some pictures of some modern equipment that I used in slideshows when I first started at NARP. I had a brand new sleeping car, Algerian sleeping car in the station at Oran. I had brand new narrow gauge commuter train equipment in Tunis. Actually, I was at a American Friends Service Committee work camp on the about 10 miles south or 10 kilometers south of Tunis on the narrow gauge main line south. And this slide could also have done the purpose. This locomotive, train 202, DF103, and I've labeled it Alstom 1968. So this locomotive was brand new, and I guess Alstom used to have an R in it, Alstom. And by the way, we did have locomotive problems on this trip. We stopped in the middle of nowhere for a while, and I remember getting out, and a bunch of us got out and watched the engineer with a somewhat antiquated telegraph system repeatedly shout, "Ici, train 202." Well, the problem was the train 202 had engine trouble, and eventually, I guess he contacted and fixed it. But here we are back at T-Town, working the head end. And fortunately, I was traveling with a young man from Morocco who was at the same work camp with me in Tunis, and he lived in Saleh, which is in Morocco, just north of Rabat, the capital. And here's the train that will take me to the Straits of Gibraltar. Interesting thing about this trip from Tunis to Morocco to Spain to France, the only electrification I recall was from the Tunisian border with Algeria, from Annaba, which used to be called Bone, to Algiers was electrified. And the only steam I recall was from Paris to the English Channel. Chronological here. June 20th, 1969 was the last day the trolley car came to Watertown, or more precisely to Newton, just across the river from Watertown. So Newton Corner really had gone backwards in terms of public transit because they lost their railroad stop, which was called Newton on the B&A timetable, but it was known locally as Newton Corner. So that disappeared around 1960. And then the trolley car, which served Newton Corner as well as the Watertown terminal, that was discontinued in June of 1969. I recently learned that a major factor was the way the turnpike bridge was set up made the trolley car motormen feel very unsafe going in one direction. So another reason to hate highway construction. In 1971, November, I think September probably, the Western Maryland ran a special train which went east and west. I guess it was Hagerstown. They used both of their routes. This was actually organized by NARP. It was purpose was to make money, but I don't think it did. But that's where I first met Anthony Haswell, the founder of NARP. And here's another shot from that train and their high iron car brothers 2 on the tail end. Now, I was hired in November of 1971 to work for Guy Rosmarin, special assistant to the governor, Governor Sargent, Republican of Massachusetts. And I believe he hired me because I had written a one-page memo that explained that commuter trains should serve the Foxborough, the Patriots. And he hired me, I think, on the strength of the knowledge reflected in that memo. So within a few weeks, I was on a bondholder special that was with John Barringer, then the CEO of the B&M. We did a 3-day tour of the entire B&M system. Here's the White River Station, White River Junction Station. In the forlorn days, I think they had no passenger service at that time. The White River Yard Office. Here was from the front of our Bud car, we're plowing through probably little used, or maybe there was just a snowstorm, Northern Railroad, the old line between White River and Concord. A couple of old units at Lowell, the old roundhouse at Rugby. And then in 1974, I got to ride the Mexican railways when they were still running a lot of old equipment. My first view of the Pacific Ocean was from the Pacific Railroad heading up towards Las Mochis. And you can see people used to talk about the rainbow trains that Amtrak ran when it first started, but there was some rainbow trains also south of the border. Then we took my aunt and uncle and I took the Chihuahua Pacifico east to Chihuahua. A lot of service then because there was no highways in that part of the world. Here is a long conventional train passing a Fiat rail car. I think the Fiat rail car you're looking at was the second section of the Fiat rail car that I was on. Excuse me. And then we got to the American Orient Express, showed up at Washington Union Station in 2008. Very big, impressive train. I think John Kirkwood's cars were 2 of the cars there. And then my trial run for becoming Washington representative and later vice president for American Association of Private Railroad Car Owners was to go to Gulfport and give a presentation. And at that time, the mission was just to show people on Capitol Hill that a Republican and Democratic organization that was roughly easily balanced supported Amtrak's national network. This is the Y at Hattiesburg. I joined the train at Meridian. We had a big Y move at Hattiesburg, and there's a nice picture of the station, another side view of the station. And here is the Amtrak special tied up at the dock in Gulfport, and the Apricot version of the special. And here is the Gulfport station that Amtrak, if the world doesn't end, will begin serving in the near future. I believe this is looking railroad east on the track that Amtrak will use. And this, the track going across at right angle is the former Illinois Central, or I guess it's CN now, or some short line that we used on our special. Then in later in 2014, there was an Apico special that came from Chicago that ran across the B&M across Massachusetts. I joined the train at Haverhill. Here it's pulling into Haverhill. And then it returned using the Grand Junction branch and the old B&A to get to Chicago. Someone will know where this is. You had a good presentation on the Grand Junction a few months ago. This was taken from the Apico special. Here is the rivers on the left. We're looking back over Storrow Drive, and the train is descending towards Beacon Park Yard. And here we are at Beacon Park Yard. I should say that at Beacon Park Yard, the train split so that some of the cars went east to South Station to go south on the corridor, and the rest of the train went to Chicago. I went as far as Springfield and saw this engine at Palmer. Here's a few slides that I presented previously to Apico. We had a nice ride on the Main Eastern when it was running passenger service between Brunswick and Rockland. The sad story of the bridge over the Kennebec River at Bath, when they removed the highway section of the bridge, they damaged the bridge so that the Maine DOT was reluctant to start regular service to Rockland if they would need to shut it down to fix the bridge. I guess the question now is whether they'll find anyone who wants to run anything on that line. And here, going past the Wiscasset Yacht Club and arriving at Rockland, and finally a 2015 Apico at St. Louis, the original St. Louis station. Wonderful setup for private cars, several tracks, and even an engine that I used to see in Washington. And so we wind up back on the B&A. This is the Natick station, Natick Center. And what's interesting here is that the track needs to be moved close to the platform, close to the high-level platform. I got off on the low-level platform and walked up the stairs. But fear not, progress is being made. Just on the 17th, Wellesley became the first Wellesley station to be fully accessible. The fact that you have rescue assistance shows that commuter rail is taken more seriously than it ever was before. Here is my train arriving, and here is a couple of shots of Wellesley Hill Station, where the Richardson building still stands, although Richardson would not recognize it. And there's a nice plaque. And then the Wellesley Farm Station, where the windows are completely open, so there's no warmth in there, but there are bicycle racks in there and a nice sign. And a little bit of track work being done. And if anyone can suggest a good place for this sign, which once adorned Tower 15, I wish there was a Boston and Albany Railroad Historical Society, maybe the city of Newton. I'll try them. Anyway, I've included on this final slide not only my own contact information, but Matt Cosgrove's website, which is fascinating. I think all you need to remember is NashuaCityStation.org, and the rest of it gets you to the particular picture and some others that I showed. But I've talked enough, so thank you for your patience.